The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Welcome, everyone, to an Olive Branch's webinar series on ethics in American Buddhist groups. Today we've had a conversation with Shingai Chayat Roshi, abbot of the Zen Study Society. My name's Catherine. I'm going to be serving as a moderator for the webinar, and the webinar is supported on the technical by Leslie Badar. An Olive Branch was founded in 2000 and, help me out there,
10,
thank you, primarily, so that we could respond to conflict and ethical misconduct that seemed to be sweeping Buddhist communities in the United States. Our organization really hopes to preempt severe conflicts and misconduct by teaching dispute resolution and strengthening board governance. We hope to take a proactive stance in that way. And secondarily, we have a responsive mode in cases where conflict and misconduct are already in full bloom. We respond with processes for healing and restoring harmony. And before I introduce today's speakers, there are 4 things that I want to explain. First, I think you might find that today's webinar is a little different from other webinars you may have attended. This one is an unrehearsed conversational format. It's not scripted with a presentation format with PowerPoint slides for each topic under consideration. Second, the webinar is being recorded, and the recording will be posted as soon as possible on the Olive Branch website. Third, I think you already probably know that as a participant, your microphone is muted. With nearly 100 people attending today, it's not possible to have an open phone line. But fourth, if you have questions along the way, you may enter them in the text box in the control panel on your screen. And I want to let you know that questioners will not be identified by name. So today's conversation will be guided by Reverend Keoki Roberts, who is the founder of an Olive Branch and resident priest at the Zen Center of Pittsburgh. In addition to the information that you see about Keoki on the slide, you might be interested in knowing a few other little details about her before she became a Zen priest. She was an early pioneer and leader in the organic farming movement, and during the 1970s and 80s, she turned 200 acres of worn-out land in Nebraska into a rich, productive farm, growing corn, soybeans, oats, and alfalfa. Keoki is certified in church, family, tribal, and community mediation. Next, I'm pleased to introduce Shingai Roshi, abbot of the Zen Study Society. The society has 2 facilities, Daibosatsu Zendo Kangoji, a Rinzai monastery and retreat center located in the Catskill Mountains of upstate New York, and the New York Zendo Shoboji, located on the Upper East Side of Manhattan. Roshi is also abbot of the Zen Center of Syracuse, Hoenji, in New York. And since I told a little background on Keoki, I'll add a little background on Roshi. So in addition to the information you see on the slide, Shingai Roshi earned a degree in creative writing from Vassar College, and she studied painting at the New York Studio School. She's an award-winning writer with many published books and articles. While the conversation today is unrehearsed, we expect it to flow naturally in and out and around of the topics on your screen, and the story of Roshi's firsthand experience living through Asanga's pain and confusion caused by ethical misconduct, and then leading the rebuilding of that Sangha and its board. The conversation will conclude with Roshi's takeaways from her experience. And after that, we expect to have a few minutes for your questions, which you may send to us via the box marked questions on your screen. Now, Keoki, would you open the conversation with Shingai Roshi, please?
Well, thank you, Catherine. That was wonderful. And good afternoon to all of you, and especially to you, Shingai Roshi.
Good afternoon.
Thank you. To begin today, I suspect there are a number of people attending who are not familiar with the ethical misconduct that plagued the Zen Study Society for years. Would you please provide a short synopsis?
I began sitting at the Zen Study Society when it was in its West Side apartment, and sittings were led by then a monk called Tai-san, Edo Tai Shimano, and talks were being given by Yasutani Roshi. And I became very interested in practice there, and after a year spent in France, my first husband and I began going all the time to the new place on the east side, in the carriage house. We got very active and were asked to lead a community that was being started at the new monastery in the Catskills, Daibasatsu Zendo. This was in 1974 and 75. And in the fall of 75, it became clear that there were many affairs that were being conducted with students. Women started talking to each other. There was a lot of heartache and upset feelings and a great wave of anger and disillusionment. And I would say almost all of us left in early 1976. So at that point, I didn't really have much to do with the Zen Study Society for quite a while. I began practicing with Maureen Stewart. We had been Dharma sisters at New York Zendo and had done many sessions together. And she gave me lay ordination in 1985. I stayed away until her death in 1990. And then I got a beautiful letter of condolence from the then vice abbot of Daibasatsu inviting me back. I so wanted to continue my training, and I had had very good experience with Edo Roshi earlier on. And I thought, well, maybe I'll test the waters, see how things are. I was assured things had changed, and I started going to Dokusan and session with him whenever I could from Syracuse. And again, there was this feeling of absolute mind-to-mind relationship, dynamic, the clarity of insight into koans that he was able to provide, the energy, and really a very deep, caring, and compassionate spirit. Practice with him was so challenging, and I was really reinvigorated. So I continued going to session, but I was never there on a daily basis, and I don't think there were any people who knew of any problems other than perhaps the people who lived there. But I want to really emphasize how I think the most significant issue for everyone, and this is not just at Zen Study Society, is when there's a culture of secrecy. There wasn't any gossip tolerated. There wasn't any questioning tolerated. You couldn't ask anyone in a leadership role. It was just totally hierarchical, and we were to have absolute obedience. And we didn't even know that board members were trying to stop affairs. No one knew anything until 1993. A vice abbot left. And again, no one knew why. But there was gossip about another affair. And I do remember at that time I spoke with Edo Roshi, and I said it was so damaging to have this happen, for a student to have an affair with her teacher, and it had to stop. And he agreed, and I believed him, because I really felt we had such mutual trust and respect. But then in 2008, there were a whole series of postings on the internet. The University of Hawaii archives of Eiken Roshi had been posted, and many years patterns were revealed of relationships that had occurred. Still, you know, we thought, okay, that was long ago. Nothing's happening now. And then in the summer of 2010, a young woman stood up at an informal meal and spoke. Actually, she said she wanted to have her relationship with Ada Roshi out in the open, didn't want to go up the back stairs, and wanted to share his power. So that really all hell broke loose at that point. Everyone was in shock. Suddenly it wasn't just the past, and we felt we really needed help to go forward at that point.
Wow, it sounds incredibly difficult. You're talking about things that were going on 40 years ago and that were disturbing enough that you ended up leaving practice very early on there.
I didn't leave practice, but I left the Zen Studies Society.
Thank you for that clarifying.
And began working with Maureen.
Mm-hmm. And then you came back because Edo Shimano was such a great teacher.
Indeed, indeed. And I felt when I left there in '76, my first husband and I both left. We felt as though we were thrown off the tracks, thrown off the rails. It was very hard to keep going, and we were in Syracuse at that point and leading a group here. But it was very fortunate for me to have had that relationship with Maureen. But still, I so valued my work with him and the challenges that it brought me in my practice. And this, too, I felt, was perhaps the greatest challenge that he was giving me and others. In any case, we knew we needed help, so we turned to the Faith Trust Institute. This was in September, I believe, of 2010. And they gave us a number of recommendations.
Can you say more about before we go to Faith Trust, just a little bit I want to highlight, there was this sense of this wonderful teacher, and you returned to him in 1990, and then it was still that sense of secrecy, that there was not any questions tolerated, obedience, and yet then all of a sudden there's somebody, the Vice Abbot ends up leaving in '93, and it's all just sort of hearsay and secrecy, and nobody's, just gossip going on.
Yeah, that's right. That's really an important aspect of what we had to deal with. This hierarchical attitude in which nobody was allowed to ask questions when something seemed wrong.
And if I would have asked a question, what kind of answer would I be given?
You would have been greeted with derision. You would have been told to leave. There was just no way that anything could be discussed.
And you said that you were doing your practice mostly down in Syracuse at the time, but going up to Daibosatsu for the training and sashins with Edo Shimano at that time.
Yeah, I was actually in a leadership role here in Syracuse. I would go down to Daibosatsu Zendo, which is south of us, 3 hours, for session. But just going for session, you know, you go, you have session, then you leave. You don't really know what's going on.
And how many people would have been at Daibosatsu at that time?
We had anywhere from 10 to 20 residents there at any one time, and quite a few were ordained. And there was a kind of sense of people looking down on other people who were coming to sit there for session, and you certainly didn't have any way of being, I guess, in a situation of honesty.
The people there who were living there full time, some of the ordained people that were there weren't sharing what was actually happening up at the monastery.
And I have to think that most of them probably didn't know either, because if you were a resident, as I say, you weren't allowed to question anything.
When we at an olive branch have been working with cases of clergy misconduct, the community starts polarizing.
Mm-hmm.
Did you see some of that happening, or is it pretty much a rallying around the teacher for the people who were there?
Are you talking about after this revelation of 2010?
Let's do it before and then after. What?
I don't think there was that much polarization going on until after.
Okay.
Because, as I say, very little, if anything, was ever said about anything untoward in the past. People thought that, gossip was really frowned on. There was just, if there was anything going on at the board level, we certainly didn't know.
You were on the board then?
No.
No.
I came on the board later, after, well, just before 2010's revelation. I think it was 2009 that I came on.
Okay. And so I know that one thing I heard early on in my practice was when I would bring something up that was gossipy or about somebody else, I was always told, why don't you work on your own practice?
That's right.
That's we're to turn our light and shine it inward, to look at ourselves.
Exactly, sure.
Right? And
I think we all have that, yes.
In the back there. And so then that's part of the way a secrecy can be built up. So then this occurs in 2010. This woman stands up. I don't want to go up the back stairs. And what happened to the community?
Oh, it was a period of great shock. We didn't know what to do. Everybody was casting blame on everyone else, particularly on him. He was demonized. We really felt we needed to change that culture completely. The first thing we did was contact Faith Trust Institute. They gave us 5 recommendations, including that he should step down as a board member first and most importantly. And that really was significant because past boards had no way of prevailing, as we came to understand later when we heard about earlier boards' difficulties. Since he and his wife were on the board, and it was a small board, really there wasn't any way of addressing that power imbalance. So the first thing that happened was he stepped down, and he was asked to write a letter of apology, which he did, and to set an earlier date for his retirement than he had envisioned. We formed an ethics committee. We wrote new ethical guidelines, posted them, posted monastic regulations, and of course the precepts on our website and the bulletin boards. And basically we're going through all kinds of meetings and phone calls among board members, and what to do and how to continue and how to reach out to those who were harmed. And we had an open Sangha meeting with Faith Trust, and it was all very, there was just so much turmoil. And at that same time, in the early fall of 2010, Ada Roshi asked me to be the next abbot. And I was just, oh my God. I knew that I was in his succession papers, which had been sealed since 2005. But at this point, with all this turmoil, and I had a lot on my plate in Syracuse, and I didn't want to do it. But I felt, okay, this is being asked of me by the Dharma. And I love the Zen Study Society. I grew up in it. I'm devoted to this and to doing what I can to the best of my ability. So, okay.
Wow. You were really stepping into a hornet's nest.
Yeah, I knew that. And yet, I felt I had to do it.
The incredible amount of anguish, it sounds like, with the anger and blame that was going on, but also you were said, that while there was shock, there was also a demonization going on. Mm-hmm. Can you say more about what you meant by demonization?
Well, I think when we talk about story or narrative, it's always something that we concoct out of our own perception, right? Mm-hmm. And everybody has a different take on things. There was a great deal of anger toward Eido Roshi on the part of people who had been involved with him, disillusioned mm-hmm. by him, their faith was shaken, and also by people. Some people had their own grudges. Some people had their own axes to grind, their own agendas, and there seemed to be a general kind of state of avaricious pouncing on him as the person who is to blame for everything that could possibly go wrong anywhere in the universe. So that's what I mean by demonization.
And this is certainly an important point, that we have somebody who you expressed how grateful you had been to him, his clarity, his energy, his deep compassion from the time you were first met him, and then when you have come back in the 90s and started practicing with him, and now this real betrayal that's happened, mm-hmm. and then sounds like a very natural state, but we fall into blame and demonization.
Yeah, that's right. He was such a great man with such a tragic flaw. Many times board members and I would say, are we living in a Greek tragedy? Mm-hmm. It's a great challenge for a practitioner to hold both aspects. It's not either or, but it's so easy to fall into dualism. It became the most difficult koan of my life to return to what the third ancestor Sosan Zenji called trust in mind. Mm-hmm. The perfect way is not difficult. Just avoid getting caught up in preferences. 1/10 of an inch's difference, and heaven and earth are set apart. This is what always we had to keep seeing. Wow, here I am falling into dualism. This is a huge trap. How can I hold it all and go forward with compassion for everyone?
Well, it sounds like you did a number of things to start addressing just that trying to not drop into the demonization, not to also go to the other side, but it sounds like you asked Eido Shimano to do certain things. You wanted him to step down as a teacher from ZSS mm-hmm. and to move forward on his retirement, that there will be a letter of apology, mm-hmm. that you have a group of people draw up ethics mm-hmm. and monastic regulations, and then get those posted both on the website and in the monastery and at the Zenda. Mm-hmm. So there was a way then that you were trying to walk, which without falling to one side or the other.
Yeah, it's pretty difficult. You're always feeling as though there were many times when I felt myself so angry and embarrassed by some of the things that came out of my own mouth, and other times when I thought, am I continuing to be an enabler by seeing how wonderful his teachings have been, and I could understand why those in the Sangha who continue to be loyal to him were loyal and continuing to practice with him separately from the Zen Study Society. So, yeah, it was a really difficult few years. The impact on the Sangha, the split, that was very hard to deal with. I kept thinking somehow there's a way to bring everyone back together again. I'm born in the sheep year. I'm a Libra. I love harmony. I hate discord. It's very hard for me to be in controversy. I always want to see everything in balance and in loving mutual respect. So this was probably maybe the big teaching of my life.
It sounds like one of those koan stories that you worked with.
Exactly, exactly. So there, you had the Sangha split into those who were loyal, those who hated him. Very few stayed on at the monastery. We were trying to keep our doors open there and at the New York Zendo, but it was a huge upward climb. Hardly any money, very few practitioners, and meanwhile, always new postings on the internet against the Zen Study Society from every direction.
Mm-hmm.
People with their own narratives, people coming from great pain. I understood it all, but it was very difficult, and still is.
I can only imagine. You have this teacher who you cared so much, who gave you Dharma transmission and then had you established as his successor and taking it over. So here you are in a spiritual relationship with Edo Shimano that had grown over all these years. But it sounds to me that with the calling in a faith trust and then an olive branch worked with your organization, so that you had put a different hat on, it sounds like, because you were sitting on the board at that time, right?
That's true. Well, the way I saw it, and this is kind of moving into the impact on me. I felt, looking at him, I thought, well, here's a teacher who's been brought low by his shadow side. And the more I looked at it, I thought the brightest light creates the deepest shadows. And we have such cultural differences. There's an unwillingness to explore the shadows or to work therapeutically, psychologically, from coming from an Asian hierarchical culture. And for us, we just couldn't understand why there wasn't the reaching out, the willingness to inquire. And in fact, that's why I thought it was so important for us to bring the Sangha together as many times as we could. We had such an important weekend retreat with an olive branch of open sharing and listening and finding how to be respectful and compassionate for ourselves and each other. It was really, that was really a turning point. Very painful, but I think healing and very important for the board because we could really write down everyone's suggestions for how to move forward to build a healthy organization. And you mentioned the being both a spiritual relationship and now taking on an organizational one. Yeah, this is how I felt. It was a totally untenable situation for me. Here I am receiving the abbotship from my teacher. He gave me his full trust. And then I'm the new abbot. I'm the head of the organization. I have to privilege the organization over any personal bond with my teacher. So I was installed January 1st, 2011. And a few days later, I had to call him. It was clear that we couldn't include him, despite our gratitude for all his profound teachings, and even this personal karmic teaching. We couldn't include him in events and practice at the temple or monastery. I had many discussions, with other Zen teachers who had been through similar crises. I knew there were many women who were still suffering from the impact of their relationships with him. So just a few days after taking on the abbot's role, I had to call him and ask him not to come.
It had to be an incredibly difficult place to be. I heard you use the words both angry but embarrassed. in there that is just a couple of the feelings that
it was just such deep, deep sadness. And, you know, then he had planned to teach me all kinds of ceremonial roles. I had to learn them with the help of a resident who had been his attendant. So she had to think, well, what would he have done at this point?
Mm-hmm.
And the monastic environment at that time was so dark. Some people felt I was an imposter. They wanted him back. Others despised me for my close association with him. You know, it didn't matter. Wherever I looked, there was just acrimony. Mm-hmm. And that's not even talking about the internet.
Yeah, it's incredibly difficult. And I think that your experience there is very similar to many other people who have been through this and watched their community disintegrate around them when a trusted leader does something that is so harmful.
Well, I tell you, it got to me. The summer of 2012, I was hospitalized. I stopped breathing. My heart stopped. And they couldn't find out what was wrong. I knew what was wrong. But I really feel now it's all been my advanced training in the Bodhisattva's vow. This is it, you know. We have to examine our own foibles as human beings, and through confession, through purification, through trust in Dharma, this is the only way. And so I can be a better teacher, I feel, because of all this.
So if you had to talk about some takeaways, what would they be? And so let's look at from the spiritual side what you would like people to know, but also from when you put the hat on as a board member. And
right.
Actually, okay. I need to clarify, what is your position now with the board?
One of the things we did was change our bylaws so that the abbot is no longer the chair of the board, the CEO of the organization. I'm just ex officio.
Okay. And by ex officio, I think of that as meaning that you're on the board because of your position.
That's right.
Okay.
As abbot.
And as abbot. Then, so if you're removed as abbot, then you would lose your position on the board.
Correct.
Okay. Then, so with that relationship, then looking from both the spiritual head of ZSS and then also switching to you're now a board member but not chair, and walk those two roles with me and what you see has worked or not worked or been better or changed.
Well, of course, the first thing we wanted to do is move from crisis management, examine structures that had allowed these issues to happen. And I think any group needs to look at anything where there's a negative pattern. What's creating the environment for it? You know, we all know the Four Noble Truths, suffering and the root of suffering. What is the root? We had to look at the climate at our temple and monastery. Students asking questions and treated with disrespect, snide comments, negativity. There was an atmosphere of bullying, of hazing, of physical abuse. So much fear. No one wanted to be the nail that stood up to be hammered down. So this kind of thing, this kind of repression and passivity that comes from it can lead to complicity and therefore can allow exploitation. This is so important.
That's a really important thing in spiritual practice. But let's talk a little bit about how, you know, when we come to a spiritual teacher, shouldn't we give up our ideas about things and the way it should be?
What I think people need to remember is that we must have trust and complete surrender to the Dharma, not to a human being who is trying his or her best to be a good vessel of Dharma. But this is really crucial. You know, many people confuse the two. or conflate the two and become, devout cult-like followers of an individual rather than understanding this surrender to Dharma.
There's a koan about a wild fox, if I remember.
Yeah, Shaka Joe and the fox, right? It's not a matter that if you're enlightened, you are free from causation. It's how an enlightened person does not ignore causation.
Such an important piece.
Yeah, we have to recognize the importance of a trustworthy environment. That's one takeaway.
Creating that trustworthy environment is really then sort of the spiritual hack, though, that I hear you putting leading with these things, to get rid of the hazing, the fear, the repression, the complicity, that negative climate was there. Then what you had to do was change the way the teacher is, the spiritual leadership is handled.
Not only the teacher, but the people who are in leadership roles, to reaffirm how we govern with kindness, with mutual respect, to treat each student as Buddha, with all his or her individual strengths and difficulties. So no authoritarian or abusive dynamics enter into it.
Wow. So that's a big difference than the climate that you actually grew up in with this.
That's right.
Yeah.
And then I think, yeah, to be knowledgeable, to read something like Scott Edelstein's Sex and the Spiritual Teacher, that's another thing. We need to be aware of the danger signs, the red or yellow flags.
Really? And so what would be an example of a red or yellow flag?
If someone is feeling that there's something wrong, that someone perhaps in the Sangha is perhaps exploiting another Sangha member, to feel that there's a way to speak to the proper people. There are channels. We have an ethics committee. We have committees of the board. We want to be able to know that there are active committees that are reaching out to everyone. There's a relational interaction that needs to be there, that needs to be underscored. And also to trust your leaders, to trust your senior students, to have the clarity that comes from practice.
So, but in there I also heard you switching over to a little bit more of the hat of a person on the board. That we have to have our committees, the ethics, and that board in place that will allow people to say if they feel something's going wrong.
Yeah, I think it's important that the teacher doesn't have absolute power, that there are checks and balances with a strong board, with strong committees, with transparency in communications, where there's an atmosphere of openness. All of that has to be really worked on. This comes from our practice. It isn't something theoretical. We have to reaffirm the centrality of practice. We have to really all be aware of how we are fearful of what is demanded of us by this practice. We have to enter the gate of non-duality in a way, That's really it. And so consistency of practice, I feel, is really one of the most important things we can do.
And by consistency, showing up every day?
Showing up, going deeper, being at session, being, going against our own tendency toward just coasting, finding ways of engaging in the practice that are more demanding. There are so many things that we offer, and I think we just have to continue as best we can with these approaches. Looking at traditional texts, for example, and seeing them as students' own life experiences, talking about these things that we've gone through, and really learning together from them.
You had said a check and balance on your power as the spiritual head. What is an example of that?
Well, for example, if I think that a particular program would be a great idea, and I run it by the board, and people on the board say, no, I don't think we really want to go in that direction, or no, we don't want an outside teacher coming in and doing such and such. Then I say, okay, what would you suggest? I think this is a need, so let's discuss it. Now, I'm a very relational leader, so it's easy for me to be that way, but I think it's not always easy for some people in other sanghas. It certainly wasn't for my predecessor to work that way. So that's something that the board can put as an agreed upon way of working together.
Mm-hmm. And having that in place, you have students of yours who are on your board?
Yes.
And do you use any outside people on your board?
We have both at the Zen Study Society and at Hoenji, we have board members who are practitioners. They're not all active practitioners, but they certainly understand what Zen is all about.
Mm-hmm. And are they in a teacher-student relationship with you? Is
some are, yes. Yes.
Mm-hmm. And then that's sort of my last question around that. When here I am, your student, I'm on the board with you, and you say you want to do something. What happened? All of a sudden, I've got caught between hats, between student hat and board member hat.
If you're caught by that, then that means I'm not doing a good job as your teacher. I'm trying to teach you to find your way with your own confidence as a board member and as a practitioner, not to rely on me, not to surrender to me, but to surrender to your own Buddha nature.
Mm.
And this is upholding the core principles of Zen, you know, to really understand this, to feel how important it is for you to awaken to who you truly are.
Wow. I'd like to take a little break. I've been having all the fun with you, Shinge Roshi. I suspect there's some questions that have come in, and I was wondering if Catherine could come back and take over. She was having trouble with her internet connection before, but I think she's there and has some questions for us.
Thank you, Kyoki. I was just about to interrupt. Thank you for helping me be more gracious in that transition. I wondered if this slide that you're looking at now, Roshi, is a fair recap of what you would say the primary takeaways are. Can you either reinforce the slide or recap it for everyone before we go to questions?
I think this is exactly what I've been saying. Yes, very, very well put. The importance of honesty and of creating an atmosphere where people feel they can speak out is the only thing I would add.
Okay, then. I'll take us right on into the questions that we've received so far. The first one actually may lead us right into talking a little bit later about our next webinar, but the person asking the question says that they are just reapplying for insurance for their temple, and a question arose regarding coverage for ethical misconduct. Without getting into a lot of specifics, it would be nice to hear something regarding these types of policies. They are very limited, both in scope and coverage. Can you comment on any insurance policies about ethical misconduct that ZSS has and how you got to that point?
Yeah, that was that was actually a very important thing we had to weigh, you know, when we were concerned about letting Edo Roshi come back, or kind of access that he might have there at our temple or monastery. We learned that our insurance would be canceled if any further incident were to occur after the one that was made public in 2010. So we could not allow even the possibility of risk given that past. So the only times we settled on a policy where the only times he can come is by invitation and with supervision from a board member or myself.
Okay. So is there a specific provision in your insurance policies that address misconduct then?
Yes, there is, I think, in every insurance policy.
Okay, great. Thank you. So the next question we have before us then is that, Rocha, you spoke about affairs and relationships, but the question is, what about the assaults that are described in the New York Times articles and in the Aitkins papers?
Well, I think it's a horrible thing if that actually happened. I don't know, but sometimes things are put forward in ways that are very dramatic. I only can say that I abhor such, just abhor it and feel terribly sorry.
Can I ask, what is it you abhor?
An assault.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Something that was more than a consensual relationship. And I do want to add that there should be an understanding on the teacher's part that no relationship between a teacher and a student is proper. It's not really consensual because of that imbalance of power. And I know there are many teachers in the States and elsewhere who have had relationships with students they consider consensual and have married their students, and this is quite common, but I think it is quite confusing for the students.
And your new set of ethics and policies state that that's not permitted, is that correct?
That's right.
Yeah, okay. I think that's pretty much what's common out there now, is the, certainly in the AZTA and American Zen teachers as well as the Soto Zen teachers.
Yeah, in our statement we say sexual harassment, sexual intimacy between teachers and students, sexual advances on the part of residents toward visiting students at Babasatsu Zendo, as well as casual and or serial sexual relationships among students are not allowed because students come to our practice centers to train in Rinzai Zen Buddhism.
So here's another question that probes the topic of the relationship between teacher and student a little more deeply. The questioner is asking, considering the mythos of a teacher being able to suddenly transmit mind-to-mind realization through shocking experiences, how do you suggest that a student navigate whether a teacher will be transmitting spiritual insight through shocking or intimate situations versus when a student is just being used by a teacher for pleasure?
Yeah, well, I don't get that shocking part. I think mind-to-mind transmission is something that's built up very subtly and slowly and with deep concern and mutual regard. I don't really understand that shocking incident. That sounds to me like there could be exploitation involved in that too.
Leslie, I had a question earlier in the, very early in the proceedings here that seems to be missing now. It had to do with Tibetan Buddhism. Do you have that on your screen?
I sure do. Shall I go ahead and read it?
Sure.
Okay. The question is, some Tibetan lamas believe that having sexual relationships with some students is beneficial for the students and is actually an act of compassion for the student, regardless of what the relationship looks like or what the woman says afterwards. How, if at all, can such a belief and attitude be brought within an acceptable ethical framework?
You know, I'm not a Tibetan practitioner, but I value and really can appreciate the sacredness of sex in a spiritual context. But as we have seen, it's so easily exploited. And if you have a teacher who is really unblemished and really clear, and that practice is part of the relationship of guru and student, and it's done not for personal pleasure, as I understand it in the true tantric way, but as a way of going further, deeper into oneness, then I cannot, as the Pope said, who am I to judge? I just think that most human beings do not have that clarity.
Thank you, Roshi. Here's another question that is fairly lengthy, but I'm going to go ahead with it because we have about three or 4 minutes left until the end of our session. Well, maybe we have more like 9 minutes. So the question goes like this. A large part of my community's work is done providing programs and counsels to local agencies for the underserved and to members of other Buddhist groups that don't have the programs we offer. Having come through our own ethical problem, we are being looked at by these members in our programs as someone who can help them voice ethical concerns within their own Sangha or community. What is your recommendation for introducing a conversation about ethics and behavior when you may be the outside agency their membership trusts to stand up and speak?
I guess if they're trusting, that's a wonderful sign that they feel that you've done well by your own community and that you have something to offer. I would certainly think that it would be a good idea to accept the invitation and not to come in as some kind of authority, but as somebody who's been through the difficulty and can perhaps listen to what needs to be said and the problems that are being addressed with compassion.
Thank you. Here's another question, quite different from that one. What is the responsibility of the Sangha to the students who have been harmed through a teacher's misconduct?
Well, we all have a responsibility to reach out, to try to include in whatever healing ceremonies and sittings that we can hold together. My experience has been that the people who have been harmed have really wanted to steer clear of the Zen Study Society. To my dismay and my sadness, there has been a pretty severe cutoff, and I sincerely hope that in the future we can see people come back and tell us what we can do, how we can hold and extend our loving support.
I think that's one of the saddest parts about any kind of ethical breach by a trusted leader, and not just sexual. We could look into many others that happen, but that it destroys the trust that this person came to the Zen Center in the first place, came to that spiritual community, trusting the leader and trusting the Dharma, and then they are harmed and they have no place to go but to leave.
That's right. But luckily, these days, we have so many wonderful teachers and sanghas all over the country and all over the world. So if people feel that they don't want to have anything more to do with me or the Zen Study Society, I would hope that they might go to someone trustworthy. And I know that there are people that I would not hesitate to recommend who have been through this kind of thing themselves and would extend a very helping and healing way of teaching.
What a wonderful suggestion for people who have been harmed, and I hope we'll get that down on our list of takeaways from you. I want to say how touched I was by your commitment to work as spiritual practice with people who are serving on the board, that part of their practice is taking their student hat off in some way to you, but following that responsibility as a board member and acting from that when they need to. And that in itself you manage to walk that line that is your job as a student as well, which is to serve as an independent, honest, forthright board member while you're serving while you're also a student.
As I have said, as I've tried to point out, this is non-duality. And we are very fortunate to have board members who are practitioners and who really are looking at everything from the point of view of their own spiritual understanding. So everything that we have to discuss has to be seen through this clarity that comes about through our Zazen.
I think we're just about out of time for questions. There's one more here that I'll pose that just came in. It sounds as though ZSS, you were able to deal with most of your issues. What role did an olive branch play, and how was it useful to you?
Oh, I want to say how grateful I am to all of you. I think the most important moment was that weekend that we held with the Sangha and all the amazing things that came out of that, the honesty, the putting the timeline around the walls, the ability to speak without any hesitancy about the things that were most difficult, the suggestions for us as a board. And then you worked with us so well in building our organizational structure into something that was trustworthy and clear and responsive. I loved all of those retreats, even though I was exhausted after them, but all the best practices, the values, mission, and vision work that we did with you. I don't remember now how many retreats we've had with an olive branch, but every single one really helped us so much. And putting in place a new membership structure, just feeling that we have what it takes to go forward. And we're seeing a real turnaround now with a sense of warm connections and vibrant practice and more students coming, old-timers, wonderful new people. So it's really with a feeling of gratitude and further resolve that I go forward from this point.
Well, deep gratitude to you for today. Thank you. And Catherine, you still have a few things to cover.
Yes, I wanted also to close and say on behalf of all of us at an Olive Branch, I want to thank you personally, Roshi, for today's conversation. And we want to thank all of the people participating today. Shortly you'll receive a survey from us, and if you would fill it out, it would help us plan future webinars. Whoops, I went too fast. So I'd like to invite everyone online to join us for the next webinar, which is on Tuesday, February 24th, 2 o'clock Eastern. That would be 11 o'clock Pacific. We're going to be talking about governing a spiritual community. We have an attorney specializing in nonprofit, tax-exempt, and mission-based organizations working with us. And we believe that the incidence of severe conflict and misconduct, as has been experienced by ZSS, can be significantly reduced by strong board governance. It's part of our proactive, the proactive part of our mission statement. So you will be receiving a flyer with the information about the next webinar and a link to register if you'd like to attend next month. So with that, I'd like to say thank you to everyone, and I think we've brought the ship in possibly 1 minute ahead of close. So thank you, everyone.
Thank you very much for running the show today.
All right.
So please take care, everybody.
Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye.